Nature isn't just out there in some far-off exotic location. It's all around us, including right outside our doors. Hi, my name is Shannon Trimboli, and I am the host of Backyard Ecology. I invite you to join us as we ignite our curiosity and natural wonder, explore our yards and communities, and improve our local pollinator and wildlife habitat. Hi, everyone. The first real episode of the Backyard Ecology podcast went live on December 3rd, 2020. Now, technically, that was episode 2, but I don't really count the introduction episode as a real episode. All I was doing was introducing you guys to the fact that I was getting ready to start the Backyard Ecology podcast. Anyway, this is episode 40, and we are fast approaching 25,000 total downloads. The Backyard Ecology blog, which was officially launched in September 2020, is also growing. And I just wanted to say that I am very thankful to all of my listeners and to my readers. I can't wait to see where this journey continues to take us. When it comes to podcasts, I know how easy it is to miss an episode. I do it with some of the podcasts that I listen to. I have the best of intentions for going back and listening to an episode. But life happens, and the episode slips out of my mind. I don't even want to talk about all of the episodes that I have downloaded but haven't gotten around to listening to yet. And I know I'm not the only one who has a pretty good backlog of podcast episodes downloaded that we want to listen to but just haven't gotten around to it yet. So with all of that in mind, I thought it would be fun to review the top 10 most downloaded Backyard Ecology podcast episodes in 2021. Maybe you'll find one that you missed, or be reminded of one that you wanted to listen to, but then forgot about. Hopefully, you'll also be reminded of some of the episodes that you really enjoyed. Links to all of these episodes can be found in the show notes. So here we go with the top 10 most downloaded episodes this year. Number 10 was NRCS Programs for Pollinators and Wildlife. The Natural Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS as everyone calls it, is a federal agency that has lots of different land use and land management programs for private landowners. In this episode of the Backyard Ecology podcast, I talked with Randall Alcorn about NRCS programs, how to learn more about the different programs that are available in your region, and the general process of working with the NRCS on a project. Number 9 was deer ticks and Lyme disease. Now, ticks may not be our favorite organisms. And I admit, I don't have any great love for them either. But as people who enjoy nature and presumably spend quite a bit of time outside, I think it is important to understand our risks of catching different tick-borne diseases. And that's why I asked Dr. Howard Ginsberg to be a guest on this episode of the podcast. Number 8 was winter hummingbirds in the eastern U.S. We always think of hummingbirds as being summer birds. But did you know that we also have winter hummingbirds? They aren't common, and they become less common the further you are from the southern coastal plains. However, they aren't unique either. In this episode, I talked with Brainerd Palmerball, a retired zoologist from the Office of Kentucky Nature Preserves, about these winter hummingbirds. You also get to hear a little bit about my experience with a hummingbird that overwintered at my place several years ago. Number 7 was bats and bat houses. Bats are very diverse and fascinating creatures that play an invaluable role in our ecosystem. I love the fact that more people seem to be recognizing this and wanting to do things like putting up bat houses and making their yards more bat-friendly. Reed Crawford, who is my guest on this episode, is studying bats and how they thermoregulate. His research has lots of implications for how we can make our bat houses safer for and more attractive to bats. Number 6 was acorns, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and more, responses to forest disturbances. Most research projects only last a couple of years, but that doesn't mean that longer research projects aren't valuable. In fact, they can sometimes lend insights that shorter-term projects may miss. In this episode, I talked with Dr. Katherine Greenberg. She has been involved in multiple long-term studies looking at how different species or groups of animals respond to forest disturbances, both natural disturbances such as wind and wildfires, and human-created disturbances such as logging and prescribed burns. Number 5 was Mysterious Bird Deaths of 2021. If you live in the eastern U.S. and you like birds, then there is a good chance that you heard about the mysterious bird deaths that popped up in several states this spring. In this episode, I talked with Dr. Brian Evans. Brian is an ornithologist at the Smithsonian National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute. He started studying the bird mortality event at a regional level soon after it started to be recognized as an issue. This was a very open and candid discussion about a subject that garnered a lot of confusion and frustration in only a few short months. Number 4 was growing native plants in small yards. I am frequently asked about growing native plants in small spaces or in typical suburban yards with HOA or city ordinances. And I'm not the only one who's getting those questions. I hear those same questions being asked throughout the native plant and pollinator communities. My guest for this episode was Kate Brandis, who wrote the book Native Plants for the Small Yard, Easy, Beautiful Home Gardens that Support Local Ecology. Number 3 was growing native plants, insights and stories from 3 native plant nurseries. This episode featured a roundtable type discussion with Margaret Shea from Dropseed Native Plant Nursery, Alicia Bozzella from Ironweed Native Plant Nursery, and myself from Busy Bee Nursery and Consulting. We discussed growing native plants, some of the challenges that each of us have had in growing different species, some of the questions that we frequently get from our customers, and a variety of other topics. This was really just a very fun, fluid discussion where our passion and enthusiasm for our work really showed through. Number 2 was a conversation with the co-hosts of the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast. Sometimes it's just fun to sit down and have a conversation with other people in the industry. And that's exactly what I did in this episode, where I talked with Fran Chismar and Tom Knizik. Tom and Fran both work at Pinelands Nursery and co-host the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast. As a side note, not long after we recorded this episode, Fran and Tom had me on their podcast. So if you really enjoy this episode, when you get done listening to it, flip over to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, and you can listen to us kind of continue the same style of conversation over there as well. And number 1 was factors that make pollinator gardens more attractive to pollinators. Pollinator gardens have rapidly increased in popularity, but unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot of research on the best ways to create those gardens, or on how effective those gardens really are. In this episode, I talked with Travis Watson, the horticulture manager at East Tennessee State University, about his research on the types of factors that make pollinator gardens more attractive to pollinators. That wraps up the top 10 most downloaded podcast episodes. But I have one more bonus episode for you. Some people prefer listening to podcasts on YouTube, but YouTube views don't count as downloads. So for a bonus, I'm going to share the most viewed episode on YouTube. And that was Milkweeds in Urban and Suburban Monarch Way Stations with Dr. Adam Baker. In this episode, Adam and I talked about monarch butterflies and their use of monarch way stations and other butterfly gardens in urban and suburban areas. His research provides us with some important and easily applied strategies that any of us can use in our gardens. I hope you enjoyed that quick review of the most popular episodes this year. Before I wrap this up, I wanted to remind you that I also write a weekly Backyard Ecology blog. So if you are enjoying these podcast episodes, then you might want to also check out my blog. The easiest way to find my blog is to visit my website at www.backyardecology.net/blog. Until next week, I encourage you to take some time to enjoy the nature in your own yard and community.